Hi, I wanted to come on tonight just to share a quick video. I had jotted down some notes the other morning in reference to like self esteem and shame and self image. So I just thought I would come on just to share my thoughts about that. Um, the quote, I'd like to start out with the quote. So the quote for this particular um, it's not even a journal entry per se, but the quote says, even if your body has been damaged by accident or even what you have done to it or someone else, you can still present your body as a living sacrifice holy. And that's by Barbara O'Neill. Barbara O'Neill, um, she makes content and she has a healing retreat, but she makes a lot of content in terms of making connections with the Bible, the brain, and the body, and how those things relate to each other. And I believe she's a Seventh day Adventist, if I'm not mistaken. But I've learned so much from her in terms of just nutrition and like health and the things that also affect the brain in terms of what we ingest. So I just thought, that quote, and it's so true that a lot of the damage that we've done to our body can create a level of shame and self esteem, um, concerns that we have within ourselves. But then it also is to, um, in addition, the trauma and the things that people have done to us and the trespasses against our own body. So and all those things compiled together year after year, it can create just a level of shame for anyone, to be honest. So, yeah. And so, the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. So, I didn't quite finish it all. I was almost to the end, but then I started to say, let me just read it over. I don't know why, but and so as I started to read it over, the very first paragraph, I just thought I would share a little bit of it because I think so many can relate to it. So it says that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body. 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. A quarter of us grew up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 out of 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. And some of us have experienced all of these things. So, yeah, it can get pretty um, intense because a lot of us have experienced this, all of it, multiple times over and over. So yeah, but I just thought it was interesting. So yeah, and I know, like for myself, just to be transparent, self image and self esteem has been like an ongoing thing since I was like a younger version of myself, and I know not everybody's story would be they've experienced trauma as a child. Some people have had a great childhood and then they didn't experience anything that they would deem traumatic until their adulthood. But I know for myself, I can remember being a younger version of myself and it wasn't just family life, but it was just school and just the pressure to feel like I had to look away or have certain things. And I remember being teased about the way I looked. And so early on, in grade school, it kind of created those insecurities within myself. And I just never really processed it or dealt with it until sort of now in my later adulthood. But you don't really realize like the effects of people's words and treatment of others um, until you get older sometimes. So yeah, but I can remember, and it's so, I don't want to say it's crazy, but it's like when you're younger and people say things to you that are hurtful. You never would really think that you would remember those things as you get older. Like for me, I never would thought that I would remember some of the things I've heard people say to me that was intentionally said to hurt my feelings, or maybe it was said without the intention to hurt my feelings. But I didn't think that I would still be able to remember after all these years some of the things that was said to me, but I can't. So yeah, but I can remember, since grade school, and then it just kind of carried on into adulthood. But um yeah, and then as far as like, I'm so sorry about the train. It's getting louder because it's getting closer to the house, so I'm so sorry about that. But um yeah, and I just thought to myself, well, I've experienced that, my self-image and self-esteem was sort of taking some hits earlier on in my younger self, but then I also think about my adulthood and what that has looked like. And um well, even as a child also, as far as in terms of like what he mentioned in the book, a lot of my family when I was younger were, they drank a lot. And I can remember, I think my first like sip of beer was like from my grandmother, her asking me if I wanted to have a sip of beer. And I remember like drunken spades nights where they would like get so drunk, and it would be like a good time one moment, and then the next moment they're fighting. And I can remember those sort of events happening as a kid, and seeing that. I used to, I don't think I thought much of it as a child besides being scared. And but as an adult, I didn't really think that it really was carrying, like sticking with me, but it actually was, which sort of creates in the lining for like the anxiety and things like that. But yeah, I can remember. So I mean, the book, if I would recommend to read it, I definitely would recommend it. But I had to share that first paragraph because I mean, a lot of us have grown up and been around environments with abusive people, whether it's friends or family, people who drink a lot, or we've been in an abusive relationship in some capacity, or we've been sexually abused. And I'll also speak to that really quickly too. I understand what that's like as well. And I would say for myself, like the environment in which it happened for me, it I felt shame about it and didn't realize in the moment exactly how much shame it was. And I was actually afraid to talk about it. And I mean, just one of the, I'll just go off on a little tangent here, but I can remember shortly after, this was like in my 20s, I had been sexually abused or assaulted. And I had just told myself, even right after it happened, that I would never tell anyone. And the shame sort of set in immediately. Like, immediately it set in. And in the moment, I didn't realize what was happening, but I had swore to myself I was going to just never talk about it to anyone and just pretend that it didn't happen. And for whatever reason, um, I remember one day I was at work, and I was talking to one of my coworkers, and for whatever reason, I don't know why I brought it up to her, but I said, you know what? This person did this to me, and I don't know what I thought that she was going to say, or what. I didn't know what her response was going to be. But I was so surprised when she said, you know what, he did that to me too. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I don't know what prompted me to go from taking something to my grave and never sharing it to then sharing it with my coworker. And for her to tell me that the same person had did the same thing to her. Even in the moment when I told her this, I don't think I even realized how powerful it is to actually use your voice and to not be ashamed of something that you don't want to be known, especially something that has been done to you. There's no shame in that, actually. And now that I think back on it as I'm kind of going through my journey here, I say to myself, what if that may have been the first time and only time that she wanted to has shared that with anyone? But then also too, with that being my first time I shared that with someone, it's like you never know what you say and how vulnerable you are with someone, how that is also freeing someone and helping someone and helping someone be be vulnerable and able to use their voice and able to understand that they're not alone. So that moment, when I was in my 20s, I didn't realize at the time the power in that moment of me sharing that to her and then her responding back to me. I was quite literally shocked when she said that. But then I said to myself too, it's like, now that I think about it, it's like, I wonder how many other women, I wonder how many other women. And here's the thing of being trapped in secrecy and being trapped by shame and being so bound by it. It's because even in the moment when we both recognize there's two women having a vulnerable moment here, we both realize that something wrong had been done to us. And neither one of us, I know I didn't, but I don't believe she had done it either, but neither one of us had gone to the police or to seek any sort of um, justice for what had been done to us. And it's only now that I'm in my 30s that I've started to heal and process it and really uncover some of these things and remember some of this trauma that um, I'm able to see now that it's there's so many women out here and in men just suffering in silence because they feel like they're alone, and the trauma has put this blanket of secrecy on them, and it's created this level of shame and insecurity, and it controls everything about how you show up in the world. And I totally get that and resonate with that. And you know it's just, it's power in being vulnerable, it's power in sharing. um and it's like I heard Brene Brown say it in some respect, and she said that one day your story will be someone else's survival guide. And it's true, because you never know who you're helping by sharing what you know, sharing what you've learned, sharing something you've been through. And I think we all come from so many different backgrounds and upbringing, and we've been through so many things as adults and things like that, and we can all learn from each other. So yeah, yeah. So off my tangent, but yeah, I can definitely see how. And the thing is too, what I come to understand now is that when I have experienced trauma and have gone through something difficult, I never would have identified it as shame or something that was like that I needed to really unpack. I just sort of thought I could bury it and bury it and suppress it. And that only can kind of continue for so long before it just erupts. Um, or until you become numb to your life. And that's sort of what happened to me. So it's great power in your voice. And I am an introvert at the core. So the fact that I'm even like on here talking is, but it's like I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to share. And even if one person will listen to what I'm saying and say, you know what, I do want to go to therapy and talk to someone. I do want to talk about what happened to me. I do want to figure out why do I feel so much heaviness and burdened down by some of these things that has happened to me. I do want to understand what's going on with me and check in with myself. So yeah, and don't be afraid to talk about it. And it's so much power in talking about it because you find your voice and you find yourself in the process. So yeah, it's unpacking it. Um, yeah, and one thing that I heard Miles Monroe say, you know, he was like one of the first people I had listened to on my healing journey here. Um, but he said, every person comes to earth, but you decide how much of yourself is manifested. And it's so true. It's so true because I am in my 30s now, and it wasn't until at this particular moment, well, last year up until now, but that I realized how much of fear and not feeling good enough and feeling like I don't have enough value, or you know, not valuing myself and always finding a flaw within myself, and finding comfort in that, which will dictate how I move. So then there's the self-sabotaging and the the feeling of always being rejected when that's not really the case. And so it affects every aspect of your life, if you let it. And I think that's so true, because it really is up to us, you know. And it goes back to Barbara O'Neill's quote in terms of our bodies being a sacrifice and presenting our bodies as holy, um, and to be of service. Um, because if we don't take any measure to heal, you know, God will help us. God, He doesn't miss anything and He will help us. But He needs a body to partner with, which is why we're here. We're here to create and to bring heaven to earth and to create love and extend His kingdom to earth. So He needs a body and a vessel to do that. But if there's no healing being done, there's just trauma that's stacked, and then you're quite literally buried down to where you feel like you're just going day to day and you're alive but you're not living. So it's you feel like you're just going through the motions. And I know what that's like too. I know what that's like. But it's not until, for me, that when I began to heal and kind of, as he would say in the book, unearth some of these things, is that, okay, I understand now that, you know, I wouldn't make some of those same choices or put myself in some of these situations that I once did. And I understand now, as I'm reading scripture, as I'm getting kingdom teaching, as I'm reading heavily, as I'm pouring into myself positive things, and really learning what righteousness looks like and being as upright as I can in terms of how I treat myself, how I talk to myself, and what what I'm ingesting. Um, it has so much impact on what you release, and so yeah. Let me just stick because I feel like I don't want to make the video too long, but yeah. And so a couple of the notes I had taken down, 20 minutes, so I'll make it quick. So one of the things I said was having freedom from the past so it doesn't become a cage you stay in. We grow up with the ideas and concepts of having material things or looking a certain way, and we reflect those same decisions as adults. Forever seeking materialism, constantly consuming, surgically changing our bodies to fit what's trending, what's popular, like a paper bag in the wind being tossed to and from because we're not grounded. And that's true. And that's the whole scripture reference in Romans, because in Romans 12:1 and 2, and it's because we're not meant, we're individuals and God made us all different. We're not meant to be like everyone else. We're not meant to fit someone else's standard or whatever they say is beautiful or is acceptable. And so when someone makes a negative comment about you or they say something that is hurtful, that's their own opinion. That doesn't have any, and I say that and it affects us, but my understanding now is that another person's thought about myself doesn't qualify or matter, because I wasn't born to be anybody else but myself. And it's taken me 30 something years to really begin to understand that and really start accepting that. But it is true, because there's a reason we all don't have the same skin color or hair type or body shape. And we're different because we were created that way to learn from each other, and we all have different things to add. So and oftentimes too, what I have come to understand too is that when someone makes a negative comment, it's really that person is oftentimes envious of something that they wish they had or could embody. So, for example, and here's what I mean when I say that. I can remember like looking at, there was like this YouTuber, I forgot her name, but she was basically just trying on clothes on her YouTube channel, and she was like a heavier set sort of woman, but she was just trying on her clothes for this particular brand, and she was very kind, and she had a really positive and upbeat demeanor and things like that. And from what it appeared to be, that she wasn't ashamed of her body in any capacity and things like that. But of course, there's always people in the comments that have something negative to say. But what I had taken from that is that sometimes people are not really trying to be offensive and say something slanderous about her body type per se, but sometimes it's maybe the envy or the longing and wishing for they themselves to feel like they can be confident in that way, to be free and express themselves. So sometimes people are offensive and hurtful, not really because they don't like something about you, but it's really because they do like something about you, and they also want to embody that thing, that quality. So a lot of times it's like that. So I've learned to sort of to care less about what other people think. There's a reason why we're different. So yeah, and the trauma and the things compiled on top of one another and just the history, if you don't really unpack some of that, it can be like a cage, and you'll never fly out of that cage and be free from it all if you don't even recognize you're in one. And that's also something I know just for my own self. So, yeah. And then I also, yeah. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what is some of the things and concepts and ideas that's helped me? And so one was to just recognize that I had been in a cage, and I've learned to break free from that by learning to talk about things and use my voice. And within that, to set boundaries, but healthy boundaries. And it's also being mindful of how I treat myself, because it's so important what I'm pouring into myself. And I only can give out and release what I have. And if I don't pour into myself anything positive and really nurture myself, then I can't really express that and give it. Um, and I think that's so important for those of us who've been through a lot of hard and difficult things, actually. But and one thing I thought about too was this whole concept of like a brand ambassador versus a kingdom ambassador. And what I mean is that, like, I'll give you a quick example. I remember when I was in grade school. I can't remember exactly what age I was, but I can remember it was like the first day of school, and my I didn't have new shoes. I didn't have new shoes. For whatever reason, I didn't have new shoes on the first day of school. So I had told my mother, I said, I'm not going to school if I don't have new shoes. I'm not going. And for whatever reason, and I know there's probably going to be a parent or somebody looking at, even if my own son said that to me, I would look at him like he was crazy. But, you know, in the moment, I can remember the morning of school, the first day, we went to the shoe store and sat in the parking lot of the shoe store until they opened up, until for me to get my shoes, and then she took me to school. And I remember that so well. And I was so grateful that she actually didn't like say you're going to school no matter what, but was that really correct? Was that really correct? And was that really helpful to me? Probably not. And I say that because I had grown up with a sort of materialistic household in terms of getting dressed up for the holidays, and you know, everybody's buying a new outfit and new shoes when a holiday comes up, and what you have and what purse you have, and you know, Jordans and all these things, right? And it's like growing up like that, it's and that's like the whole concept, like this brand ambassador thing. It's because oftentimes it's like easier to get caught up in materialism in consumables rather than a kingdom ambassador, which is more about character. And the character thing is so key, because I think if more of us actually had character, there would be less trauma and less pain in the world, quite honestly. Um, yeah, it's true. Um, but it's something that's really lacking. And even for my own self, and I'm not talking to judge or anything like that, but I also have learned the the flaws within my own character, in terms of how I was showing up and operating, and how I treated myself and how I treated others, and why I was doing that. And so character is key. And that's the whole kingdom concept, is about aligning yourself with God and aligning your will with his will. And but it's about character, and that's what's really important, because I think um Denzel Washington was the first person I ever heard say it, but it was something to the tune of, "You'll never see a hearse behind a U-Haul behind a hearse," and it's because the material things, it doesn't go with us. It's not something that is something we can just hold on to forever. Um, and I also, yeah, there was a something I heard Bishop Samuel um, Blake say. He said, "I'm determined in my internal that I'm not making moves in my external that don't agree with my eternal." And I'll say it again. He says, "I'm determined in my internal that I'm not making moves in my external that don't agree with my eternal." And so it's about that alignment, that alignment with who you really are, the essence of who you are and who God created you to be. But then you showing up like that in how you move and function. Not with perfection necessarily, or this unrealistic standard, but to be as close as possible to the person God created you to be, and to really present your body as a sacrifice and holy and of service, and to create and to be here, and to manifest yourself in who He made you to be. And so I think by working on character is kind of the only way to get to that point. Um, because you can have all the material things in the world, but then be miserable and just a cruel person, or really, really unhappy, and you you don't want to contribute really anything to the world, and really selfish, and you can still be depressed and all these things with all the material wealth and things like that. So it's character. um and character is also, you can pass on the material things and that, but the character is also key, because it's about how do we want to really raise our children, and what do we want to leave behind. So yeah. And as far as like the materialism, now that I've sort of grown out of that, I'm so thankful for that, because I didn't have that learning tool as a child, and um, teenage years, and even early adulthood. um, and so I'm not really passing that on to my son, in terms of him feeling like he has to have a brand on to feel like something. And one of the other things I had written down to kind of go into that, I said, "Nobody can sell you your worth, but if you don't know it, you will buy anything and put up with anything where you feel accepted or tolerated." And it's true. And that's the whole like advertisement, is because to get you to buy into what they think you should have, and to make you feel that you're worth more if you have this. And I know there's all types of, with social media now, there's all types of brand ambassadors and things like that for companies and those sort of things. And that's fine. But what I'm more speaking to is just to constantly seek materialism, and not focus on your spiritual, and your character and who you are as a person. That's what I'm really speaking to. So it's so important. And you'll I can speak for my own self too. You'll separate yourself from really good opportunities because you don't feel like you're worthy enough. I have done that. But then also too, I can realize too that I've spent so much money in time and things like that, trying to keep up with what I think I should look like, or what I think I should have. But then it's also too, like, I put myself in relationships and friendships and things like that I had no business being in, because we didn't align at all. And it's really a character to character thing. Like, Do our values match? Do we fundamentally, do we care about some of the same things? I mean, who are you at your core is really what's important. It's not about, how much can you consume, what can you buy. It's really like who you are as a person. And I've learned for myself, I could, in my 20s, I used to work like two jobs at one point and just constantly feeling like I had to make money in order to maintain my way of living, but then consume and have more. And just, I never really was like a family person. And I I just sort of had my priorities wrong. And I wouldn't show up to family events and things like that. And I just think now, and it's like, why would I, what was it all for? What was it all for? To have extra money saved, but then I wasn't reliable. I would flake out on events and not go to family events. And um, my family just sort of started expecting me to not be at things because I was working. And it's like, after a while of doing those sort of things, and it's about like not being dependable and not prioritizing properly. And it but it but it really stemmed from me not having myself figured out in terms of what I valued. And I made decisions from that place of not having it figured out. And so, character, it's something that is either built up in a positive way or a negative way, depending upon what we've been through. But then if you don't try to do some healing and really unpack that sort of stuff, our character can have like a lot of holes in it. And it takes some work and time to rebuild that and really make yourself solid and a person of integrity, actually. And I've learned too, as far as like my own journey here, my own walk, is that as I started to value myself more in how I treated myself and how I speak to myself and how I behave. And I'm not perfect, but as I've started to learn and then act on what I've learned, it it relieves some of that. The shame can't stay, and the feelings of not, of worthlessness and not feeling good enough and things like that, they start to diminish, because there's something that happens when you start to understand that. And I'll speak for me, but there's something that happens when I started to understand that, okay, this is actually, I talked about my other video about, I decided to, I went from vegetarian to now vegan. But I started to understand, okay, what do I want to feed myself? Physically feed myself, but then what do I want to feed myself, um, in terms of what I want to watch and what I want to listen to and who do I want to be around. And I'm understanding that, there are certain things that don't align with me in terms of, um, just a lot of, you know, crazy partying and smoking and, a lot of sexual things and, people who are immersed in that sort of thing and always wanting to go out and all these things. And so, like, once you realize, okay, this is who I am and that doesn't align, and then you can set the boundary for yourself, and now you begin to walk differently in terms of how you show up. And once I started to watch what I was ingesting, hearing, actually eating, I actually started to feel better. And so I noticed that even within that tweak, or those tweaks, because there's multiple things that tie into that, I started to feel better about myself, physically. just taking better care of myself. Their shame in feeling like the lack of, you know, self-worth and things like that, it can really beat you down to the point where you don't even care for yourself. And then because you don't care for yourself, it actually adds more of a heaviness to it, because then you feel like you're the it's magnified. The worthlessness of that you feel is like sort of magnified at that point. And so I understood, okay, now that I'm taking this step of watching what I'm ingesting and putting to myself, and I'm understanding the value of nourishing myself, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Okay, now what else can I do to add on to that? So the next measure was that I had adjusted my diet, but then it was like the physical activity. Um, I can remember like a little over a year ago, I was like at my heaviest weight. So now I'm about 72 pounds down or so. Um, Maybe about 75 actually. But it's taken me some time to get there, and it was because it was like stepping blocks for me, in terms of figuring out what worked and what did not work. And that's what I would like recommend too. It's about just figuring out a place to start. And so for me, it was about, okay, what in my environment is contributing negatively to how I feel? And it was really, I realized that I was like on this monotonous sort of like routine of just working, taking care of my son, feeling exhausted. I had no energy. I had no vitality. And I just felt like just just low in spirit, low in terms of how I thought about myself, low in terms of how I thought about life. And I had to just start thinking about, okay, well, what can I do bit by bit? And those bits started to add up. So then it was like, okay, physical portion of it was like working on myself physically, getting some form of exercise daily. And initially, the whole point of it wasn't to lose weight. Actually, it was because I noticed when I would go for a short walk, I would feel better after. And that's exactly how it started for me. I noticed that I would feel better after I went for my walk. And I said, okay, the next day I have to do it again because I want to feel like that again. And that's what kept me going initially. And the weight loss sort of just happens naturally, with dietary changes and things like that. But I mean, now I just think about, you know, your my motivation for starting wasn't about weight loss. It was about what feels better, what is mentally stimulating me here, what is making me feel better in my own body. And it was actually getting the movement in every day. And so that actually is what helped me as well. But and it just, and then naturally once you start pouring into yourself, reading, listening to positive things, moving your body, if you know, if you're able to get the physical activity in, getting the sunlight, and really nurturing myself and really showing self-love for myself, which I had actually never done. If I really was to really say that, to be transparent and 100% honest, from my teenage years to my 20s, and I'm now in my 30s, I can honestly say and look back that I had never shown myself any true decent measures of self-love, because it wasn't until now that I understand what that looks like, genuinely what that looks like. And it has nothing to do with like being in a relationship with a person and having material things and all of this stuff. I thought it meant something, but it wasn't. It was just nurturing myself and physically and mentally. So and the self-esteem and how I think about myself, and knowing that I am valuable and that I can use my voice and that it means something and that it's okay to be different, and all those things just started to kind of come in alignment. um and the negative things I once thought about myself just diminished and faded away. Um, so yeah, it's the character is key. Character is key is for sure. So yeah, and then the last point I just wrote down here as a question was that I said, are we prioritizing looks over legacy? And I said that because right now it's like the culture is so consumed with like having a particular body type, or this hustle culture, having this money and material things, and it's what are we really passing down to the next generation? And so yes, money and assets are can be helpful to pass down for sure, um, but it's also just considering the other things in terms of how we treat ourselves and how we treat our children, and what we're what we're passing on to the next generation. So what are we leaving in the earth? And that's something that I'm thinking about so heavily now. But again, it's taken me into my 30s to really start asking these sort of questions to myself. So yeah, faith and ethics and values and character, and these are things I had never really thought deeply about in my 20s, to be honest. I just was going through life and just letting things pile up, and yeah, and so I just thought I would just share my notes that I had written down the other morning. And so yeah, and then also, in the book, I don't want to like read the whole entire bit, but I just thought it was really interesting because he says it actually helped me a lot, too, was because he had mentioned about that we typically, once we experience trauma, the traces of the trauma, it actually changes the way our brain operates. It actually makes physical changes in our brain. And so and it's not until like I actually started to read about my brain and my body. Also, I won't keep going too far into it, but yeah, it wasn't until I started to like get an understanding about what actually is going on in this physical house, in this body of mine, um, and it started to really help me. And that's what I'm saying. It's like I started out with the dietary changes because I noticed how my body felt and responded to that. And then I said, okay, I like the way I feel with this. I'm going to keep going and make further changes. And so it was like everybody's different, but once you start listening to your body and you can understand like, okay, this does not feel good. Even when it comes to like a relationship or a person, this doesn't feel good for me, or this does feel good, or I'm going to you know, work out and decide to exercise a couple of times a week because I feel better afterwards. Or, I don't want to eat this because I know I don't feel great after. Or I don't like this environment, so I'm not going to go to this sort of place. And it's like once you start making those small daily choices, they add up to be so monumental and huge. And it begins to really shape who you are, and you become more aligned with who you are. And there's freedom in that. And I didn't know who I was in my 20s. I had no idea. Teenage years, forget it. 20s, no. I healing, and it wasn't even on my radar. So yeah, but yeah, I just thought I would share some of my notes here. So thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you on the next video.